Many Arab countries already serve as hubs for multinational companies doing business in Africa and Asia. But the question is, how can countries build on their already existing strategic location to attract more investment? What needs to change to make it easier to set up a regional hub? And how can inter-Arab trade be boosted? And where does the UK fit into that picture? These are the questions that our next panelists, I'm sure, spend a lot of time grappling with. And I'd like to hand over to Oliver Cornock, Editor-in-Chief of the Oxford Business Group, who's going to be leading this discussion. Many of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with OBG's reports on Arab economies. Oliver, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. It's great to be here representing Oxford Business Group on this session. Now, the organisers have asked me to say two things. This is in many senses the graveyard slot. So my job is to push things along. I'm going to prevent you from falling asleep, and I'm not going to prevent you from going to lunch soon, I promise. These people, though, are supremely well placed to talk about what we're here to discuss now. These are the people that are involved with actually implementing the policy. They interact day in, day out with the private sector, people doing business. That's what we're here to talk about. So, and 2 points of housekeeping. If you have a question, please do put your hand up. We will get to you. I'm going to move straight into questions and answers pretty quickly because we haven't got much time. Secondly, please do remember to turn your mobile phones on when you leave this room. That means turn them off now. Those are the 2 bits of housekeeping. Finally, I'm just going to introduce our panellists. His Excellency Dr. Khaled Hanafy is the Secretary General of the Union of Arab Chambers. Dr. Adam Marshall is the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, and Mr. Simon Penney is Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for the Middle East. Again, these are all people very well placed to answer your questions about doing business, answering your questions about putting the policy into practice. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Khaled. Would you like to open with your comments?
Good afternoon, first of all. Actually, when we talk about the Arab markets, as the title of the session is, it's a real hub. Why it's a real hub? First of all, I just want to mention that the Arab countries nowadays, they rely on the private sector to the extent that the private sector in the Arab countries now is counting for around 75% plus of the GDP of these countries. So the private sector now is the leader in these countries. This means simply that we are talking about openness, more openness. We are talking about market economy and more competition with efficiencies. Also, this sector employs almost the same percent of the labor force in these countries. That's number one. Number two, the Arab region is not a homogeneous group because we have diversity among the 22 Arab countries. And this diversity is very good for the sake of having concentration in different areas and having different levels of competitive advantage in different places. Number three is that the Arab world is a hub, yes, because we're not just talking about 400 million citizens live in the Arab world, but we're talking about access to around 2 billion citizens. And thanks for the trade agreements among the Arab countries on one hand, and between the Arab countries and Africa, the European Union, the Asian countries, and America as well. So the products that originated in the Arab country will have access to all these markets, specifically the markets that exist in Africa, which is very growing markets as well. Logistically speaking, we are talking about the Arab world, the 22 countries, all of them have access to the water, to seas or oceans. Accordingly, there is a great room for capitalizing on the ports that exist and having some logistics zones and hubs. And nowadays there are great initiatives by many of the Arab countries. I don't want to name, because most of the Arab countries now, they started development in logistics and ports. So there is a great room for having better supply chain management, which is the key role for success. Finally, the Arab market or the Arab markets are not markets. and we should not deal with the Arab countries as markets to be targeted by outsiders. The Arab markets should be dealt with as strategic allies. So we have to move from just talking about simple international trade in the form of exports and imports to strategic alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really interesting points there. Not least on the proximity to such huge growth markets. I don't like the word emerging markets anymore. I talk about fast growth markets. These markets we're talking about actually are no longer emerging. They're well emerged. And actually, the GDP figures we hear about, these are the envy of developed economies. It's a really exciting time. So, without further ado, Simon, over to you. Simon is now based in the region and took up his position, I think, in 2018.
Good. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you to the Arab British Chamber of Commerce for this very kind invitation. And thank you for the introduction, and as you said, my title is Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for the Middle East, having joined 12 months ago from a career in banking, the last 10 years of which have been spent within the Middle East region. I have been asked to talk about the region as a global hub, and it is clear the centre of global trade is moving east. 20 years ago, 62% of bilateral trade was between developed Western markets. That share has now decreased to 47%. In the same period, the value of trade between emerging economies has increased tenfold, led by China, India and Southeast Asia. What opportunities does this shift create for us within this room? For me, the answer is clear. This is an opportunity for MENA to redefine its role in the world, and it is an opportunity for the UK to play a part in making this happen. My role as Trade Commissioner is to connect a UK audience with a regional MENA audience, to drive mutual trade and mutual investment, which is why I am delighted to be speaking here today. Can I have a show of hands in the first instance for those of you that are representing UK entities? And those of you that are representing Middle East entities? It is clear that there is interest between our two regions, and that interest is mutual. You are here because you know that the appetite for increased trade and investment between the UK and MENA exists. I want to turn that appetite into action. UK trade with MENA grew by 53% between 2009 and 2018. In the same period, UK trade with the GCC grew by 90%. In fact, the GCC is the UK's 10th largest trading partner and 4th largest trading partner outside of the EU. As a banker in Dubai and Abu Dhabi during this time, I saw for myself the positive impact of the increased trading relationship, not just in the exchange of goods and services, but in the exchange of ideas and the strengthening of relationships. I saw then, as I do now, the importance of the UAE and the GCC as a gateway between the East and the West, and increasingly as a gateway to the South. The UAE is the third largest re-exporting country in the world and re-exports more to Africa than any other re-exporting country. Between 2012 and 16, 11% of re-exports went to Africa, primarily into North Africa. It is these connections that create the opportunity for MENA to redefine its role as a hub for global markets. And the UK is already a valued partner in making this happen. I'd like to highlight 3 areas where I think the region has a role to play as a regional hub: in finance, technology and logistics. The region is a global centre for Islamic finance. 5 of the top 10 most developed Islamic financial markets are in the GCC, and this number is growing. This is complemented by London as the Western capital of Islamic finance. There are 15 UK institutions providing Islamic financial services and 5 licensed Sharia-compliant banks. The London Stock Exchange is a key issuer of sukuks, raising over $53 billion through 72 sukuk listings to date. Regional financial centres such as the Bahrain Financial Harbour, the DIFC and Abu Dhabi Global Markets make it easier for professional and financial services firms to operate. Many UK banks and financial services have made the GCC their regional hub for obvious reasons: its location, its access to skilled labour and its business-friendly location. The regulatory environment is clear and predictable, a key requirement for a successful financial ecosystem to develop. I know many countries represented in the room today are looking at developing their financial centres, and the UK stands ready to help. Secondly, the region is becoming a tech and innovation hub. MENA is coming into its own. Fintech, artificial intelligence, smart cities and medtech are key to the region's transformation agendas, leapfrogging ahead by using the latest innovation. The scale and ambition of the region's innovation projects is unsurpassed. Take Expo 2020 Dubai, where our own Secretary of State broke ground at the UK Pavilion last week. Or Saudi Arabia's NEOM, a $500 billion smart city, which when complete will be nearly the size of Belgium. And this is just one of dozens of giga-projects which Vision 2030 will deliver. There are equally ambitious projects in Kuwait, Egypt and Oman. When I was last in Beirut, I visited the UK-Lebanon Tech Hub, which has supported 81 startups, created 2,000 jobs and raised $83 million of investment to date. And in Bahrain, the central bank's regulatory sandbox keeps the nation ahead of the curve in fintech and cryptocurrency. And thirdly, the region is a logistics and infrastructure hub. As global trade flows move east, MENA is at the centre of this activity. Established port cities in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi and Yanbu, and newer ports in Duqm are a gateway to growing middle classes in Asia and Africa. Airports and airlines are key to intra-regional trade. Emirates Sky Cargo is the air freight division of Emirates Airline, with dedicated cargo flights to 50 destinations worldwide, 13 of which are now in Africa. To the UK companies here, I want to tell you that MENA's role as a financial, technology and logistic hub means that it is ripe for investment. The UK's export strategy and DIT's single departmental plan both include outward investment as a priority. UK outward investors are succeeding across the region. It is estimated that more than 6,000 UK companies have already established themselves in the region, and there is every reason to believe this number will grow. Yes, there are challenges and barriers, some real and some perceived. My role is to engage in the region, working with governments to address some of the barriers to trade. World Bank ease of doing business indices are a very important metric that many companies and governments are increasingly focusing on. MENA countries rank between 11 and 186 in the 2019 report, so you can see there's a very diverse range of indices. One question I am often asked by governments is how can we, as a government, get more UK companies to invest in our country? By focusing on those factors that make doing business easier and more competitive than your neighbour, businesses will come. The last thing I want to highlight is UK's own export credit agency, UK Export Finance. We have in excess of 30 billion sterling of appetite to invest in the Middle East region. Today, that number is significantly underutilised. The message I want to leave you around this is UK Export Finance is not just for UK companies exporting. It is for borrowers based in the region that want to buy UK goods and services. So it's not a product just for UK companies, it is available to all countries. And we stand ready to help and work with countries to help deploy UK's very significant financial commitment to this region, the largest commitment that the UK government has made globally. By working in partnership across government and the private sector, I know we can build a more prosperous, stable and secure future for the UK and our partners across the region. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. That was a very comprehensive overview, and actually done in record time, because I think we could have unpacked so many of those things, and I'd love to have the time to do that, as I'm sure many of you would. Adam, turning to you, and on the back of that, I just wondered whether you'd like to follow on. Perhaps we've heard there, some of the objectives, we've heard the opportunities. Are British companies availing themselves of these things, and what more can be done?
Well, Oliver, thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be with you today, and hopefully I can provide sort of a complementary view from the UK side, because the British Chambers of Commerce represents about 75,000 UK businesses employing about 6 million people, extraordinarily active in the international trade arena, and now working with 51 British chambers in markets all around the world, including a number in the Middle East and North Africa region, extending our presence and extending the practical support that we can provide for UK companies that complements that you see from the Department for International Trade. I think the first thing I'd say, and there are 5 brief points that I'd like to make, if I may. I know you're overdue your lunch. It may soon turn into your dinner. I'm very encouraged by the positive attitude that I see amongst so many UK companies about doing more in the MENA region and via the MENA region as well as the optimism that you see from businesses based in the region who say, look, we're ready to do more with UK businesses as and when they come. We're starting to see that level of interest rise, and I'm sure that Simon and others are starting to see the amount of work that they have from that interest rise as well. But my second point, which is probably my most important, is that the UK needs to demonstrate here at home that we are open and ready to intensify those trade and investment links. Simon spoke about Emirates Cargo and the huge array of flight connections that we need. Well, we need to ensure that we get our airports expanded and help our regional airports as well increase their connectivity to the MENA region so that it can be used greatly as a hub. And this is a huge priority for us to make sure that we can get the air connectivity. Another priority is making sure that UK ports are ready to handle changes in customs arrangements that may arise due to a little thing called Brexit, of course, that we're dealing with at the moment, to ensure that those who are trading with the MENA region don't see themselves stuck in queues, for example, or having to deal with unwanted and unexpected delays to the processing of their products. Same goes too for other types of border friction. We need to ensure that as we build these trading relationships, that the welcome that our international business guests get at the UK border is a positive one. And of course that businesses who are transacting regularly with the region can ensure that they can get business visas as quickly and swiftly as they can, so that people can come to the UK in order to seal those deals. So UK openness and UK readiness to increase that trade, hugely important. The third point that I would make is that there is a big job of work for all of us in this room to do to help UK businesses understand how the region can be a hub and a jumping off point for other markets which are growing as quickly as colleagues have said to us today. Khaled talked about strategic alliances, so hugely important, but I think a lot of British businesses are just starting to understand the potential of using the region as a first step in a global export strategy, and we want to try to help more of them to do so. And my fourth point is that we also want to help those businesses understand and mitigate some of the potential risks that they may face in doing business in a new part of the world. There are many, many British businesses that have become comfortable exporting into certain markets or working with certain markets that don't have experience of working with others yet. We need to help them develop that and also deal with both some of the hard and soft factors that they may face in order to both break into markets successfully and ensure the flow of their goods and services can continue uninterrupted. The fifth and final thing, hugely important, is continuing to match up partners between the UK and the MENA region. There's an absolute commitment from the British Chambers of Commerce, from our chambers across the UK and our global business network to contribute to that as much as we can, to work with colleagues at DIT, to work with the Arab British Chamber and the chambers across the Arab world in order to boost the amount of business that is indeed happening between our markets. So we are very committed as a set of business organisations, but the one thing I'd hope to leave you with is that we will be pressing the UK government as a private sector organisation to ensure not just that we can take advantage of every opportunity for trade in the region, but the conditions are right here in the UK too, so that that trade and investment can flow freely. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Dr. Khaled, turning to you a moment, we've spoken a lot about the region as a hub. What's being done by individual countries within the region to exploit the Greater Arab Free Trade Zone, for example, the free trade area, but also using countries as a hub? So, for example, Jordan as a hub to access the Levant and some of the problems there, being prepared for reconstruction as and when that might happen in Syria, for example, Egypt to access other markets. We all know well the sort of the trope of establishing in the UAE to access Saudi Arabia, but also spreading that out, using the region to access Africa, to access Central Asia, places like that. How's that developing?
Actually, the region, part of the region is already in Africa, because when we talk about North Africa, we have Arab countries located in North Africa, starting from Mauritania till we reach Egypt. So there are many countries already are existing in Africa, and the Arab countries that located in the Gulf area, they already made great development in the areas of logistics, in the area of diversifying their economies to a great extent, on the area of modernization, relying on the fourth industrial revolution to a great extent. So now we're talking about different Arab world than used to be perceived in the past. So there is a stereotyping for doing the business with the Arab world. That's what I want to say here, that we're talking about a different Arab world with a different orientation over here. Logistics is the key element over here, as mentioned by my colleague here, and the logistics now is witnessing a great development in this area, in this region. And we know that if we look at the global environment now, and we were witnessing the trade wars that exist and the Silk Road and all these elements, we can recognize that there is a great room for having a path for the trade passing through the Arab region, whether when we talk about the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and the development that exists over there, or when we talk about the rest of the Gulf countries and the ports that get developed over there with the access to different areas around the globe. So the idea here is searching for a different formula to make the business with the Arab world, not just to stick to the traditional classical one. Things changed, and the business model should change as well.
I think that's such an important point, this sort of stereotype busting. I mean, I was in Riyadh last week. The pace of change in Saudi Arabia is absolutely extraordinary. Simon, you're very familiar with the UAE. Most Gulf countries have a vision, a very clearly delineated path towards private sector growth, diversification, and trade is a huge change agent for that, isn't it? We are actually beginning to see that fulcrum point, I think, where the private sector, autonomous private sector growth is happening. Is that a fair assessment in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I reflect on a lot of the work that we're doing as the UK government, I think historically what we've tended to do is to try and help UK companies export goods and export services and find buyers for those goods and services. But what is clear that is happening, and has obviously been put in place for some time now, is so many of the countries have their own vision strategies that take them forward. I think Dubai has one that goes out to 2071. So it's another 50 years from now. So very, very ambitious long-term transformation agendas. And I think one of the areas that we're very focused on as the UK government, and you used the phrase earlier on, is we have to move from just supporting UK companies selling goods to actually becoming partners to countries that trade is bilateral. It's not just unilateral. It's not just about UK selling anymore. It has to be about working strategically with host governments over the long term to realise their ambitions, which ultimately will result in exports from the region increasing to the UK. And that's something we actively encourage as well. But it's longer term. So it's a lot longer term strategic partnership that we are very, very keen to develop with all the countries in which I'm responsible for in the region.
Sure. Adam, just on that, of course, from a company's point of view where bottom line's everything, sometimes it's quite difficult, isn't it? You're told at these sorts of events, you need to dovetail your strategy with the government's vision, with the public sector, and then you're thinking, oh God, how am I going to sell that to the board in the UK? Can you just dwell on that a moment for me?
Well, I think many of our companies are actually more long-term in their thinking, perhaps, than they're sometimes given credit for. And when they see the certainty of a development pathway in a partner country that goes forward as far as some of them do in the region, they realise that the business potential of that and the return on investment they can get over the years is quite good, and they get very excited. You only need to look, at some of our services companies who are so heavily involved in many of the big transformational infrastructure projects in the region to see that in action. I think where companies perhaps see more uncertainty and where they see more risk sometimes is here on the UK side. Because whilst the UAE may have a vision out to 2071, we sometimes have difficulty having one into next week.
We have to get 31st of October.
Yes, so we have some difficulties on our own side, and those difficulties here sometimes make things a bit cloudy. But there's also an opportunity, I think, in that for a lot of UK companies, because what they say is as long as conditions are flat at home, the investment overseas, the opportunity to move into markets overseas becomes more and more important to their profitability and to their well-being. And they take those opportunities. We want to help them do that to balance out at this time.
Sure. Dr. Khaled, you spoke of a huge disparity between sort of the ease of doing business in, well, maybe it wasn't you, sorry, but we spoke about the ease of doing business, a huge disparity there. You see a huge cross-section, you oversee that in your position. What are countries doing to sort of help with this? So bring down some of the barriers to trade and make countries more appealing to British investors and businessmen?
I think nowadays we can talk about most of the Arab countries are very open. Of course, when you see here in this floor, you see people from Kuwait, from Oman, from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, from Qatar, from Emirates, from Jordan, Iraq, Libya, Egypt. All those countries, and Tunisia, Algeria, all of them are very open nowadays. And they are not just open by pronouncing that we are welcoming or we are open. They already set strategies for 30 years ahead, 40 years ahead. Most of the countries now in the Arab world, they have already their strategy 2030, 2035, 2050, 2070, and they have a clear strategy. Also, the business environment get developed dramatically in most of these countries, and based on the international reports, not just based on their point of view. So the development over there is great. And the idea here is that many of these countries switched their challenges to opportunities. And that's the point over here.
That's the crux. Now, we are so tight on time, I'm going to go straight to questions. I'd like to get as many as I can. The gentleman in the front, please. Please could you state your name and the organisation you represent and keep your question very brief.
Okay. My name is Qais El Yusuf, Chairman of Oman Chamber of Commerce. Oliver, thank you. You're doing a great job in Oman. We already have publication with you in partnership. Thank you. I have a comment for Mr. Penney and a question for Dr. Marshall. The comment for Mr. Penney is thank you for all your efforts in Oman. I think what you're doing, what DIT is doing, to bring together this delegation, we really have seen you doing a great job. And today UK's largest investor in Oman. So thank you, you've done an amazing job. We cannot say the same about British Chamber of Commerce. A lot of effort has been done by the government, and we don't see that yet from the British Chambers of Commerce. And I would like to know, you said you want to sign agreements and expand your role in the Chamber. How do you see this expanding? How do you see this form of partnership growing between your chamber and between what the government is doing through the IT? And they're doing a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And how do you see this partnership growing, not only with Oman, but the rest of the Gulf? Do you see it complementing? How do you see that rolling over?
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say we see our role very much as complementary. We are a private sector network by definition. We have been UK-based for a long time. We are now moving to build our presence in markets around the world. We're pleased to be involved in several markets in the region. Look forward to adding them onto our list. But the important principle for us is getting the British business communities in those markets organised so that that activity takes on a life of its own. And one thing we have noticed is that many of our competitor countries over the years have had a much stronger effort in this vein. Sometimes they have had that through great public sector support. Sometimes they have had that through historical reasons and certain economic ties. But we are working on it. We are excited about it. And what we are excited to do is to create a private sector network that can complement and work with the efforts of UK government. We know that we all, as business communities, have to do more to get some of our companies excited, get them the information they required, and get them over the fear barrier. It's something that's very much in our sights.
Thank you. And the gentleman here, please.
This is Mohammed Gahtani from Yanbai Chamber of Commerce in Saudi Arabia, the CEO and the President of Fair Value Business Consultant. My question, I'm concurring with Mr. Khaled Hifni for the changes and dramatic changes in Arab world, the Middle East. To be honest, there is a lot of projects talking about Saudi Arabia. There is a lot of projects going on in Saudi Arabia. And the system has been changed a lot. For example, opening the business visas and visiting visas to Saudi Arabia has been changed different than before. And I'm assuming in the GCC country as well. And there is a lot of initiatives being changed, 2020, 2030. What we are missing as investors in Saudi Arabia, having the expertise from UK or Britain companies, is not moving to the speed that we are expecting, or we are not seeing the movement to the speed that the changes is happening in the GCC country and the Middle East as well.
Sure, I think.
So we are missing the information, the communication between the both parties. There is positive signs, like this summit, what we have here today. This is good initiatives, but what we are expecting more, the question for Adam and Simon, what we are expecting in terms of moving the information and the movement on the ground from UK and Britain companies.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think the pace of change is not matching the information coming out for opportunities to be matched. So,
yeah.
Khaled.
Yeah, that's right. I really agree with you. That's why we're here today. And that's why the Arab British Chamber started to have its main role. And we just discussed that what disseminated right now regarding the 30 billion sterling pound that's available for the businesses between the Arab countries and the UK. We are going to share this information, and we're going to start distributing the information. Also, I think, and we are going to ask the Arab British Chamber to have a sort of a network to show the opportunities that exist in both sides. Because in one hand, in the UK, there are some offers and some ways of collaboration. On the other side, there are some facts that exist in the Arab countries and not known by the British or the UK business people. So more information should be shared, and should be shared in a digital way, not just in the very traditional and classical way. So I agree, but this is a start for what you're talking about.
I think that summed that up pretty well. Do you have anything to add to that? No. Brilliant. Could we go to the gentleman there, please, and then the gentleman here at the same time? So we take that question, please, and then the one over there.
Thank you very much. Adam Smith-Anthony from Omnia Strategy. Thank you for the discussion. Adam made the point about the fear factor, which I thought was interesting. And I wondered if the whole panel might say something about the legal protections that already exist, or the additional legal protections that need to be put in place in the Arab area, in the Gulf and beyond, to give foreign investors that confidence that their people and capital are going to be safe. I mean, for example, just briefly, there's growing international concern in the jurist and the business world around the case of Marsha Lazareva in Kuwait, who I think spent 472 days in jail and was only bailed after a demand of $30 million, despite there being no credible case against her. And that, I imagine, gives many people jitters around the idea of moving their people or their capital in place. So what should businesses know about what protections they already have or might be created to give them that confidence? Thank you.
Brilliant. So one on the fear factor, and the gentleman over here, please. Thank you. The gentleman with his hand up there. Thank you.
Afternoon. Sorry. It's just a comment, actually. I don't have a question. UK Expo Finance was mentioned by Simon. So I just wanted to say that I represent UK Expo Finance here, and I'll be delighted to field any questions. I'll be here around the event, throughout the event, so happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So this is a summit, a forum in action, ladies and gentlemen, that goes back to the previous question. But to come back to you, sir, who'd like to tackle that? There is, it comes back to the stereotyping, it comes back to fear, and obviously volatility of regulation, law, implementation of it. There is a risk, obviously, in investing in different markets. I think that's a given. Who'd like to comment on that?
I'd simply say that, for many of the companies that we work with across the Chamber network, there's sort of a template, a number of issues that they look at with every market that they try to get involved in and assess risks appropriately. So whether it's investor protection, whether it's IP, whether it's mobility and people, etc., they tend to make a fairly broad-based assessment, particularly when they have some experience of working overseas. And what you'd hope is that over time, what they'd see is that assessment with all of the progress and change that we are seeing across the region, with all of the changes in the business environment across the region, you would see that assessment becoming more and more positive. And I think we've seen, as Khaled was saying earlier, that many things are evolving and emerging in that space. We'd like to see that trend continue, because we would like to say to any British company that going into any country in the region has a similar level of risk or complexity, either as an investor or as a trader, than to other markets that they are more familiar with, so that they can make the comparison appropriately. Some companies aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add to that one. I mean, I mentioned the point during my speech around ease of doing business indices, and I'd encourage you to sort of actually have a look at them. Each index is broken down into 10 sub-indices, and within those sub-indices, one of them is protecting investor interests, and there's a whole host of other things. It is no surprise that the UAE tends to be the centre for UK companies setting up in the region, because it is ranked number 11 in the world for ease of doing business. I mentioned the range within the region goes from 11 to 186. Now, that's not to say businesses aren't doing business in the 186, but it's no surprise that the concentration, when companies look at where they're going to do business, they tend to look at places where it is easiest. So it explains a little bit why the UAE has become so fixated on those ease of doing business indices. And we're starting to see a lot of other countries, and through the UK's development agency, DFID, in some of the countries, some of the lower income countries, we do a lot of work as the UK government with programmes about targeting those individual indices to help those countries become more investor friendly for inward FDI.
And there are an increasing amount of contracts that are stipulating arbitration in the Dubai International Financial Centre, aren't there?
Correct. And I guess when you look at sort of financial contracts and the concept of the offshore financial centre, in DISC and ADGM and other offshore financial centres around the world, those financial contracts are typically written under international law, typically England and Wales.
The gentleman at the front here. Thank you.
I'm talking about Iraq. I'm from Iraq. Today I attend the 8th conference in Lebanon. Since 2010 till now, I attended 6 conferences for IBBC, and the other one was about tourism. I can't find any UK companies except very few to invest in Iraq. All conferences I attend, they talk only about oil. Iraq needs investors, in many investors in different subjects: health, education, construction, housing, waste, refineries. Those all are there. I can't find any UK companies except in the field of oil. Iraq is 1,200 kilometers from south to north. I couldn't find any tourism project. In the beginning, they actually working only on oil projects, but I don't find any role for the English companies or British companies in Iraq. Is very poor in investment in Iraq, as Iraq is only for oil. That's why I ask for people around here and also for Arab British Chamber of Commerce and to try to support all those fields. Under Law 13 for 2006 gives privileges for foreign companies. Those companies from China, from other countries, but no English companies except for the oil. And I thank you very much, and I hope you take into consideration that remark.
Khaled, could you just translate? Okay. I think it's about the lack of investment into Iraq.
Actually, the gentleman is from Iraq, and he's claiming that most of the UK companies just targeting Iraq just for the sake of having oil investment, and the other areas they didn't show interest in the other areas. Actually, I agree with you in one hand, and nowadays Iraq and many other countries under reconstructions could be a good source for very high return of investment, under the condition that we look at the Arab region as a whole. So in some places we can consider the reconstruction in these countries as a great opportunity. Yes, in the UK things are stable, but the return on investment is in the Arab world. The high return on investment, the opportunities exist over there. So from business perspective, it's very wise to think of a formula to target the countries in the programs of reconstructions. And in this case, the utilization of the financial resources will be great benefits.
I think there's a whole conference, a whole summit on that in itself, and my Arabic wasn't good enough to understand all of it.
But I might just add, actually, in terms of UK and Iraq, we just increase our limits for UK export finance from £1 billion to £2 billion because the £1 billion was utilised. So there's a very, very significant amount of UK government financial support for business in Iraq.
Okay. So there's a policy level. It's now translating that into business. And again, maybe we can talk to our friends at the Chamber and get an event on that. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we are out of time. Lunch beckons. There's lots of conclusions to draw from this. Lots of questions left, which of course is actually the conclusion of a great panel session. I love the phrase "turning appetite into action," which is exactly where I'm going to leave this. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panellists.